Hello and welcome to the BIS talks on the Environment Management System as per ISO 14001. Do you know over half of India's population, 660 million people, live in areas where fine particulate matter pollution is above India's standards for what is considered safe. Pollution is a silent killer. The air pollution levels in India are among the highest in the world, posing a heavy threat to the country's health and economy. The mankind today is confronted with various challenges in environment management as a result of growing pressures on the environment from pollution, inefficient use of resources, improper waste management, climate change, degradation of ecosystems, and loss of biodiversity. ISO 14001-2015 for Environment Management System is a tool to help organizations implement sustainable and environment-friendly manufacturing process and service systems. BIS adopted this standard as ISO 14001-2015 to promote the culture of sustainable use of the available resources in the organizations within the country, with the ultimate objective of reducing their adverse impacts on the environment such as climate change, global warming, etc. BIS has certified about 200 organizations against this standard. Of these, 54% in the government organizations and PSUs, and 46% are private organizations, including large scales and MSMEs. The certified clients include organizations such as NPCIL, HAL, IOCL, NTPC, Ordnance Factories, Ramco Cements, India Cements, etc., just to name a few.
ISO 14001-2015 for Environment Management Systems is primarily based upon the principles of process approach, PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, and risk-based thinking. This international standard is applicable to any organization regardless of its size, type, and nature, and applies to the environmental aspects of its activities, products, and services that the organization determines it can either control or influence, considering a life cycle perspective. Any organization seeking to manage its environmental responsibilities in a systematic manner to contribute to the environmental pillar of sustainability can implement this standard. Some of the major benefits of implementation of the EMS as per this standard are enhancement of environmental performance, fulfillment of compliance obligations, achievement of environmental objectives.
Let us now go through the requirements of the standard to understand how these principles are to be implemented.
Any organization intending to implement EMS has to first of all determine the boundaries and applicability of the EMS in the organization. It has to identify the internal and external factors, the needs and expectations of the stakeholders involved with respect to the organization. The next obvious question is what could be the internal and external factors which can affect the environment management system of any organization. The external and internal issues will vary from organization to organization. Let us now understand these issues one by one. To give examples of internal factors, the most obvious example that comes to mind is resources, be it financial or non-financial, that is machinery or human resources. Besides the financial and non-financial assets, the organizational culture and financial capability of the organization are important internal considerations having the potential to impact its environment management. Likewise, external factors could be the availability of raw material, energy sources, and of course, the environmental legal requirements and climatic conditions. Remember, the identification of internal and external factors impacting the environment management in the organization will have to be undertaken by the organization itself.
What will be the scope of EMS? Let us hear from the head CHD.
To establish the scope of the EMS, the organization has to determine the boundary and applicability of the EMS while considering the external and the internal issues, the requirements of relevant external parties, and the products and services of the organization. For example, for a manufacturer of toys, the scope of EMS may be: the scope of the environmental management system includes the major product and service categories associated with the primary functions of manufacturing wooden toys at the XYZ location and distributing the product to children of all ages.
Then comes the requirement of defining the vision statement of the organization, that is, environment policy. It is the organization's commitment to consistently improve its environmental performance and reduce its adverse effects on the environment, while also adhering to all applicable regulatory obligations. A typical example of the policy may be given as: we all in XYZ company engaged in the design, if applicable, manufacture and supply of ABCD product are committed to conserve and protect the environment and to prevent the pollution, solid waste, waste liquid discharge, greenhouse gas emissions, etc., and to improve environment performance through creating awareness among all concerned, including interested parties, involvement of all concerned, meeting applicable legal requirements and other requirements, setting up environment objectives, environmental targets, services and implementation, continual improvement of environment management system. This policy shall be maintained by the top management as documented information made available to the interested parties, communicated within the organizations, reviewed and updated periodically. For implementation of the environment management system, the top management shall assign the responsibility and authority for ensuring the EMS conforms to the requirements of the standard, reporting on the performance of the EMS including environmental performance to the top management. Next important clause is defined in the standard is clause number 6, which is planning. This clause constitutes the action to address the risks and the opportunities identified, needs and expectations of the interested parties, legal compliances by setting up objectives and targets, and planning to achieve them. First, let us understand the risk and opportunity. One of the most important aspects for EMS is identifying the risk and opportunities. It is always expected from a wise leadership to determine the risks and opportunities so that timely actions can be taken in order to prevent and reduce the undesired events which can hamper the implementation of environment management system. Sometimes a risk can also be an opportunity for the organization. For example, if any organization is using only the coal-based energy sources like oils and fossil fuels, which is very limited. So this gives an organization an opportunity to how the organization can shift from non-renewable to renewable sources like wind energy, solar energy, etc., and thereby reducing the carbon footprint of the product. Often, risks and opportunities go hand in hand. Have you wondered what organization has to do for management of these risks and opportunities? For this, the organization has to identify the risks associated with each process and activity. Then the organization does a risk assessment for each of these identified risks. Depending on the likelihood of occurrence and the severity of the risk, control measures are put in place to control or mitigate these risks. Let us hear from the representative of our license holder.
Most important is determination of environmental aspect and impact, hazard identification, and risk assessment and controls, which we consider as pivotal measure. So all related processes and procedures is communicated and followed regularly by respective departments, in addition to maintaining a legal register of all statutory requirements. We hope and we strive towards improving our guest experiences at each stage through ensuring proper IMS standards, and at every feedback that we keep getting, we try and incorporate in our process of continuous improvement. Next point that comes is to identify internal issues and addressing them through ensuring proper maintenance systems for all rides and attractions as per the OEMs, which is original equipment manufacturers manuals. Second is to carrying out periodical structural audits, and external audits are done for major rides on a regular basis, which is predefined. We also provide regular staff to carry out their daily job responsibility more efficiently, and leading them to proper experiences, and they are well trained throughout. At the same time, they have regular SOPs and which they record it on a regular basis.
After establishing the environment policy, it's now time to establish the objectives of the EMS, for which a detailed analysis of environment aspect and impact becomes imminent in planning process. This comprehensive analysis will help the organization to prepare action plan and also to arrange the resources. One of the main aims of this is to identify significant environmental aspects. Significant environmental aspects can result in risks and opportunities associated with either adverse environmental impacts, which are threats, or beneficial environmental impacts, which are opportunities. To understand these concepts in detail, let us hear from the officer of CHT.
Any organization implementing EMS is required to identify its significant environment aspects against which they can demonstrate and measure the environmental impact improvement. So, you can ask us what is to be done by the organization. Different processes will be followed by different organizations. I can give you one example. Prepare a table wherein vertical column lists out processes and in horizontal row mention types of GHG gases being emitted. Put metering system at every processes to know the emissions per shift per day. Thus, find out and record emissions of various types of GHGs per shift per day. Now, summarize the same for every month. Convert all GHG emissions in single parameter, that is tons equivalent of CO2 or metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Find the total emissions per month of the organization and let us assume it to be X units. Then let us say there are 10 processes whose emissions data is A, B, C, D, E and so on per month. Now calculate the percentage of emissions for each processes. This will indicate the percent emissions by that department per month. Let us say process number 1 emit A by X emissions, which is 3%. Process 2 emits B by X emissions, which is 6%. Process 3 emits C by X emissions, which is 15%. And process 4 emits D by X emissions, which is 30%, and etc. of the total GHG emissions. Now, define the criteria to decide which processes generates more emissions. Let us say the criteria is 10% and above emissions by any process month-wise or year-wise is considered significant environment aspect. Thus, in the above case, process 3 and process 4 are considered to be significant environment aspects.
The next important aspect that comes into the picture is environmental objectives and targets. These objectives shall be established and documented in such a manner that these are measurable and consistent with the environmental policy. Organizations can integrate these objectives to achieve short-term as well as the long-term goals. The performance of the effective implementation of EMS is measured through these objectives and targets on year-to-year basis or on the plan that we have identified. Some examples of the objectives which one of our most revered licensee has identified are:
See, IMS as a system, what it has given us, the first very thing is the ownership of the processes. Every head of department sees the intangible process behind the productivity and dynamically improves the same, which we also known as continual improvement. Second thing, risk has been identified. Risk as a combo of probability of occurrence of a negative outcome and severity of that outcome. The combo of this has defined the risk matrix here, and we have control measures just to ensure the business continuity in the time when we need it. There are many other benefits of IMS like interested parties and stakeholders. Identification of the same is very crucial. When we talk of QMS and EMS together, I can enumerate as say interested parties, say a customer. What he requires is need and expectations have been identified like order accurately taken and electricity supplied as desired. We are talking of reliability and quality of electricity. Second is say employees. So employees, what do they want? Clear instructions, and there must be a grievance handling procedure. There are regulatory and statutory authorities. So timely compliance of the same is required. There are emergency responders. There are suppliers. There are insurance companies. There are bankers. Lot many. Everything has been identified. So what we are going to do in the time to come, we are continually improving the system under IMS under the guidance of BIS.
Now comes the do section, where one has to go beyond planning to virtually implement what all has been conceived and envisaged, and the requirements for do part has been defined in the Clause 7 support and Clause 8 operations of the standard. Let us hear from the officer of CHD.
Once the planning process is completed, during the execution, the organization needs to ensure that there are right resources, people, and infrastructure to meet the organization goals. Organization has to plan from where and how these resources will be arranged. It requires an organization to determine and provide the necessary resources to establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve the EMS as defined in Clause 7 of the standard. The objectives of effective EMS can only be achieved by ensuring competency of the persons, increasing the awareness, and determining the internal and external communication relevant to EMS. Just like any other management system, it is also very important to maintain and retain the documented information determined by the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness of the EMS and to demonstrate environment impact improvement. Now comes the operational part, in which the organization has to go beyond planning to virtually implement what all has been conceived and envisaged. Operational planning and control. The organization shall plan, implement, control, and maintain the processes needed to meet the EMS requirements by establishing and implementing the operating criteria for the processes and communicate it to relevant persons during work under the control of the organization. Emergency preparedness and response. The organization shall plan, implement, and maintain the processes needed to prepare for and respond to potential emergency situations identified during the risk assessment analysis.
After planning and implementing comes the checking part, as defined in clause number 9, performance evaluation. How the organization can evaluate its EMS performance.
The organization itself can evaluate its performance against the set parameters as defined in the organization environment policy and objectives. For this, the organization has to monitor, measure, analyze, evaluate, and conduct internal audit and management reviews. What needs to be monitored and measured? Effectiveness of action plans in achieving objectives and environment targets, improvement in environment performance, evaluate fulfillment of its compliance obligations. Who can do the internal audit? Internal audits are done by the internal auditors trained by the organization for the said purpose. Since any organization is very well aware about its processes and activities, therefore, such audits are really effective in the implementation of EMS. These internal audits are done at planned interval as defined by the organization to provide information whether the EMS has actually improved environment performance and it's conforming to its own requirements and is meeting its own objectives and targets. Internal audits are generally done by the auditors which are independent to the activity to maintain the impartiality.
The findings of the internal audits are recorded, and then comes the role of top management, which will do the management review. Why this management review is important? The management review is important so that the management can get the level of implementation of EMS in the organization and what more is required to be done for a sustainable and effective environment management system. The management will review the organization's EMS at planned intervals to ensure continuing suitability, effectiveness, and alignment with the strategic direction of the organization. Based on the management review, which is an important aspect, actions for the future are decided to improve the environment management system. Now comes the act part of PDCA cycle, that is improvement clause number 10. There are two aspects in improvement clause. First aspect, action will be taken by the management to fill up the loopholes in the system. When any non-conformity is identified, swift action is taken to control and rectify it, and also to eliminate the causes of non-conformity and thereby take effective corrective actions. Another aspect is how we can continue to grow and become more sustainable and become much better organization for the environment. That becomes our continual improvement. Now that we know about the standard, let us hear about the certification of environmental management system.
Organization desirous of obtaining system certification as per any management system standard has to do the following. Pre-application stage preparedness, in which they have to understand the requirements of the standard, implement the standard and prepare documents as required by the standard, conduct training program for the employees to develop a shared understanding of the tasks to be performed, and then lay down the objectives and norms to measure progress against them. Then they will establish policy, identify risk and opportunities, institutionalize internal audit and management review, and then they will be ready to apply to BIS. Now application can be submitted online through the MSCT portal. To submit your application, identify the regional office under whose jurisdiction the premises is located and contact the concerned management system coordinator officer. If needed, MSCUR will support you and they will guide you about the process of application and extend all necessary help in the certification process.
Now, after application, what is the process of grant of license?
Now, on acceptance of application, date of the stage 1 audit is communicated first, along with the details of auditor and the fees to be submitted. Stage 1 audit is performed to verify the authenticity and adequacy of the information shared by the organization regarding its preparedness through verification of documents, field visit, discussion with the team and top management. If there is any non-conformity, Those are communicated for corrective action with the mutually agreed time frame. On successful completion of stage 1 audit, stage 2 audit is planned for final verification of the compliance with the requirements of the standard. In case there is some corrective action still required to be taken, 45 days time is given to the organization to do that. On successful completion of the stage 2 audit, license is granted, which has validity for 3 years. Now what are the post application stage? During the 3-year period, that is when you get the license, BIS undertakes 2 surveillance audits to ensure that the organization has stayed compliant to the requirements of the standard. BIS, with its vast experience and strong team of professionals, will be by your side in this wonderful journey.
Undoubtedly, BIS Management Certification Service provides confidence to the interested parties, ensures improvement of processes on a continuous basis, ensures objectivity, confidentiality and impartiality in the certification process.